Hey, listeners, before we get started today, I want to give a quick shout out and word to our sponsor, our very first sponsor, Rapido Solutions Group. Danny Frisco and Roberto Icaza, two longtime friends of mine, guys I've known for 10 plus years, the CEO and COO respectively and co-founders of Rapido Solutions Group. These guys know what they're doing. I'm excited to be partnered with them to give you a little glimpse into their business. Rapido connects logistics and supply chain organizations in North America with the best nearshore talent to scale efficiently, operate on par with U.S.-based teams, and deliver superior customer service. These guys work with businesses from all sides of the industry, 3PLs, carriers, logistics, software companies, whatever it may be. They'll build out a team and support whatever roles you need, whether it's customer, carrier sales support, back office, or tech services. These guys know logistics. They know people. It's what sets them apart in this industry. They're driven by an inside knowledge of how to recruit, hire, and train within the industry and a passion to build better solutions for success. In the current market conditions where everyone is trying to be more efficient, do more with less, nearshoring is the latest and greatest tactic that companies are deploying to do so, and Rapido is a tremendous solution for you. So check them out at gorapido.com, and thank you again for being a sponsor to our show, a great partner. We look forward to working with you. And to our listeners, that's it. Let's get the show on the road. All right, we're back. Welcome back to another episode of the Freight Pod. I'm your host, Andrew Silver. We've got a wonderful guest today, someone who was recommended multiple times. I put a post out on LinkedIn recently about wanting to change up some things, try different things, and got a lot of feedback. I appreciate the LinkedIn community, all the listeners who commented and said, try this, try that. One name that was brought up a number of times was Alyssa Correale, and she joins me here today. Welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Good morning. I'm super happy to be here. I'm fantastic. Thanks again for the invite.
Of course. And I will say too, my father has not historically told me too many things about customers that he worked with, or, just there's a memory I have, a distant one from like 9 years ago, where he told me that you specifically were one of his favorite customers in the industry. Well, and I just want to put that on the record before we start.
I love that that's on the record. We had a very fantastic and, special relationship. I'll never forget the first time that he pitched to me. He said, I will never decline a load. And you had me at, you'll never decline a load. And we'll talk about background, but a lot of it was at Niagara, and the broker community definitely knows what we're talking about when someone commits to never declining a load. And so I put the team to the test, and they nailed it. So we had an awesome tenure together, building the Niagara carrier base via a big partner in Coyote.
Yeah. All right. Well, listen, let's start nice and easy here with just give us some background, kind of your journey from, you can go college or pre-college. I know your family, you've got a little bit of the family business in freight. You've been in freight since birth, so to speak. So just kind of walk us through that, and then we'll get this show on the road.
Sounds great. I do like to say that I was born a shipper. Truly I was. So what I mean by that is my family company is a company by the name of Giovanni Foods. I imagine there'll be a few solicitations to my poor brother. After they hear the name, everyone's Googling Giovanni Foods. So grew up in a family business. So Giovanni Foods is a manufacturing company primarily focused on tomato-based products. So as the youngest of 4 kids, I, of course, went to the sauce factory every single day as a kid and after school, during the summers, et cetera. So had a lot of time to digest what it's like to be a manufacturer and a shipper, and use that as a director for what I wanted to do moving forward in the working world, and not only in college as well. So I studied to go into food marketing and in business management. So the goal was always to go back into the family business, but had the opportunity to join Niagara immediately after college. So A fun story there is I actually met Niagara in Chicago at the Private Label Manufacturers Association trade show. A great trade show to find those shippers out there that are manufacturing private label. That was when Niagara was tiny, right? Had one facility in Ontario, California on Concourse Street. Didn't even have the Philly Street facility. And ironically enough, my dad, my brother, and I at Giovanni Foods were exhibiting in the back corner of the show across from Niagara Bottling. So got the opportunity to meet the legendary Mr. P at Niagara and a few other folks, and just hit it off, and ultimately was able to join the Niagara team. So spent almost 10 years at Niagara, and we'll dig into that space, I'm sure. Following that, followed my dream and my husband's dream of moving to Colorado. Moved to Colorado and joined the fantastic team at Molson Coors. So made the move from water to beer, which was really, really fun. Following that, I joined a company called MicroStar Logistics. So continued into beer, this time focused on the logistics of kegs. So MicroStar, you could call it the Chet pellets of kegs, where we leased out kegs to brewers. Following that, I joined the team at Redwood Logistics in actually a commercial facing role. So went from being a shipper, managing operations and procurement, et cetera, to a broker, the tech arm of a broker.
Welcome to the dark side.
On the sales side. So we'll talk about that transition, I'm sure. The first time that I was really thinking, all right, I got to bet on myself and see what I can do here and differentiate my background and my experience. So spent about a year and a half at Redwood in that space. And then got the opportunity to join Uber Freight. One of those folks that recommended me for the podcast, Bob Chapius. I know he's a well-known name in the industry. He gave me a call, and
for better or worse. He's a good friend of mine.
Yeah, convinced me to join the Uber Freight team in 2020, and so it'll be about 4 years in a month, and it's been an absolute blast. So kind of a long string of things. Of course, at the beginning, I thought I'll be in Niagara forever, and then I thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to retire at Molson Coors for sure, right? I mean, that's the place you go and you stay forever. It was just phenomenal, but things change, and what I've learned is you definitely need to always be looking out for number one, and don't hesitate to act and take risks and bet on yourself.
And then you're also part of the Denver Transportation Club as the president. Is that right?
Yeah. So I joined the Denver Transportation Club the year we moved to Colorado, and I joined Molson Coors. So I was a board member for a number of years, and got the opportunity to move into the president role in 2021, I believe. I think I'm working on my third year as the president. And it's a phenomenal way to connect to the community. And I couldn't recommend folks at any point in your career, but certainly in the beginning part of your career, especially now that we're in this like remote environment, getting out in front of people, especially people you don't know, it enhances your skill set to communicate and build relationships. And so I recommend look in your community. Do you have a local transportation club? Whether it's even like a CSCMP, an Apex transportation club, et cetera. Get yourself out there, meet some new people. You may just make some friends, which is great, but you also can do business as well. So it's a blast to run the organization. The board that runs it with me is super fun. We strive to be the premier networking organization for the supply chain and logistics community in the Front Range. So golf tournaments, September 19th, come on out.
There you go. I mean, listen, I could tell why people recommended you. You're already throwing insights out there early off the intro question. So there's going to be a lot here, and we're going to probably go somewhat chronological because I want to touch on all of these businesses that you've been a part of. They're all unique and interesting in their own way. And then we've got some topics I want to hit on as well. So let's take it back to the family business first of all. What did you do when you were at what point did you actually start working in the business? What were the things you were doing? Did you enjoy it? I mean, clearly enough that you wanted to be, working in a similar type company.
Yeah, that's a great question. I like to joke that I learned to count by counting cases of sauce. I don't think that's actually true. Um, but anyways, so
One
yeah,
tomato can, two tomato
yeah,
cans.
exactly. So I mean, from the beginning, of course, as a kid, I'm the youngest of four. I'm tagging along, right? So I am going to the plant with the rest of the family after church on Sunday, right? Where I'm just messing around with my sister and my older sister and brother getting put to work. But truly, when I got old enough to actually help and not be a nuisance, I did things like entering orders into the system. Very, very old system. My favorite, to be honest, this is kind of weird. As a type A individual, my favorite was writing bill of ladings. So before you had them all printed easily with all the fields from the system, you wrote them by hand. And so when we would have, we used to supply the government with a lot of what were called number 10 cans, so the large cans of spaghetti sauce for prisons, for schools, etc. And we'd have a large order of those, and my brother would just be like, "Here's the bill of lading." And I was like, "Yes!" So I got to go through every single order and write all of the information for the bill of lading. Of course, we all know what's on one of those, and so that was one of the things. So I would work on, inventory. So understanding the spices and the amount of tomatoes, et cetera, and be responsible for counting things like that. I spent a lot of time sitting in my dad's office, listening to whatever he was working on. And, there was no big computer on his desk. It was a yellow notepad that he would write down, whether it's a memo to the employees or things that he had to do. And then I would also help my mom out. So my mom did the back office, so to speak. And so she was able to, quote unquote, stay home with us as kids. But of course was working and was the cog behind the wheel of the family business. Ultimately, as I got older and during the summers of college, I would help out my brother. So my brother, who runs the family business now, his name's Lou Dement. He has grown it tremendously over the last 20 plus years. And when he was not the CEO of the organization, which he is now, he ran all of our commercial activity, and I was his assistant, quite honestly. I would help him in the summers, make sure that he keeps track of the RFPs, and if I could help him in pricing in any way, or help manage his calendar, et cetera. So I would help him out in any way I could. So I was kind of a utility player. But I leaned certainly into the operations aspect of the business.
Why didn't you go work there full
I
time?
knew that was going to be the question. So it was my dream, right? I absolutely love the family business, and so that's why I went to college at University of Delaware. I picked the school because one, it was in upstate New York, so that's where it's. I grew up in Oswego, New York, right on Lake Ontario, so small town. I was like, I'm going to go south. It's going to be warm. And there was sun in Delaware. It was great. And they had a program that was geared towards what I wanted. So going back into the agribusiness, right? Business management, food marketing. However, when I met Niagara, I thought, what a great opportunity to go to a different family-owned private label manufacturer. So I should back up. Giovanni Foods is primarily a private label manufacturer. So, for example, one of their largest brands is Trader Joe's. Similar to Niagara, right? Niagara is their Costco, Kroger, you name it. It's all private label. And so when I met them, I'm like, this is the perfect opportunity, not only as a 22-year-old to move to Southern California, like this is cool, but to learn how someone else ran a business. Because I only knew how my dad and my brother were running and my mom were running the business. I didn't know how anyone else ran a business. And then, I joined Niagara in 2006, and I think many of us know what happened over the next, until now, but at least the 10 years that I was there, we just took off like a rocket. And I held every single role imaginable in the supply chain at Niagara. And I was just calling my brother. I'm like, you'll never believe this. And like, look at all my new machinery. And he's like, I'm jealous. I want new machines, So that's, really, it was that making that decision to go work for Niagara kind of set the stage for the rest of my career. But don't get me wrong, we've talked about it and it just has never worked out.
Yeah, I get it. So, I mean, one of the things that happens when you join a company that experiences kind of the rocket ship growth that Niagara did is, um, for one, as an employee, as a hardworking, ambitious employee, it can be quite addicting. Like being a part of that kind of growth and seeing like where there's always kind of fires needing to be put out and feeling the impact of you putting the fire out and like helping advance from day 1 to day 5 to day 10 to now we've got carriers set up. Now the loads are picking up and now we open a new facility and look, now those loads are picking up. It's like there's something really just rewarding about that. And so I understand how maybe you walked in there thinking, yeah, I'll learn a little bit here. And next thing you know, it's nearly 10 years have gone by. Is that kind of how you would explain that period for you? I mean, tell me a little bit more about what that was like, being an early employee at a fast growth company like that and what that experience
Yeah, I'm
was.
smiling and laughing because addicting, I haven't called it that, but that's what I'm using moving forward. I couldn't agree more. I mean, again, like I said, when I started, the Philadelphia Street facility had just opened. The now president of Niagara, Raleigh Sanderson, he was just finishing putting up that facility as an engineering expert. And we were in the small concourse facility. We had just started shipping our first loads to the East Coast via rail. And we learned what happens when bottles of water freeze on the train. And I'll never forget when Andy Pakoff came in and said, "This is what a frozen bottle of water looks like." And we're like, shoot, we should figure this out. So, I mean, it was the beginning days. We were learning so much. And
Sorry, I'm going to sound so dumb right now, but if there's any product that can freeze and then be okay, can it just unfreeze and be water
so
again? Or am I
this is a
just, I'm
great question. So back then we had trays that our water was in. So cardboard corrugate trays, and then it was wrapped in shrink wrap around it. And so when that water freezes, two things. One, it expands. And so the
expands.
stability of the
Yeah.
pallet is compromised. And then secondarily, when it thaws, the condensation then ruins the corrugate tray. And then the pallets just like they just fall. Additionally,
Got it.
the top, because when it freezes, it expands, the top of the water can pop off, the label can start coming off. They're thin bottles. I mean, they're not as thin, they weren't as thin then, but they were still thin, right? So the whole package is compromised. And so we had to deal with that. But it's a great question. We learned our lesson as well. How many things can actually go wrong when a bottle of water freezes?
Yeah. Well, tell me more about the Niagara experience and kind of what you took from that in terms of, I mean, you spent 10 years there. You kind of helped, as far as I know, develop the network strategy. How did you think about that as you were building out a carrier network and thinking about, relationships to carriers and brokers and such? Kind of help me understand how.
Yeah, absolutely. And quite honestly, it was all grassroots. Again, I came into Niagara as a 22-year-old, just out of college. And when I joined, I started in raw material procurement and quickly moved into more of the core logistics and transportation piece because I realized how important transportation was to ensuring that I get my materials into my facilities on time. So I started, when I was buying, I started then saying, hey, I want to call the carrier and talk to them and find out what the issue is. Why is it so difficult to work with this, shrink wrap or corrugate supplier? How do we smooth out the deliveries to make sure I have them? And I gained a lot of interest in the transportation side of the house. Additionally, what pushed me into transportation was that after about almost a year at Niagara in Southern California, I wanted to move back east. So while I was so excited to be in the sun, in the fun, in the beach, my family, my now husband, who's my significant other at the time, was all back east. And coincidentally, this was when Niagara was putting up our first East Coast plant, which was the notable one in Allentown, Pennsylvania. And so in order to prepare to move back east and basically run supply chain for the Allentown facility, I got the opportunity to train in the concourse shipping office. So that's when I got my first real dose of what like day-to-day operations at a plant looks like and dealing with drivers every single day and all the problems that we had, right? I mean, loading delays are not a thing that started later on with Niagara. Like it's always been, we are loading off the line. It is a very high-paced environment. And so starting to learn what it's like to talk to a driver, understand, how our deficiencies were impacting the rest of their day and how much money they're making and seeing their frustration and the idle time, et cetera. Working that 4 a.m. to 4 p.m. in the concourse shipping office in preparation to go back east, started that evolution of how I thought about partnering with carriers. Really experiencing that interaction with the drivers, not only at the facility in California, but then especially, when I went to Allentown and, we opened up that facility with really only a concrete pad that was right before the dock door. So we were, shoveling rocks to make sure each truck could get up onto the concrete pad to load the first loads because we didn't have the pavement done yet. And just really like getting my hands dirty and again, talking to those drivers and understanding what it's like to be a carrier, started to shape the way that I thought about procuring transportation. Now, don't get me wrong. At that point, we were still emailing carriers saying, hey, will you take this load for tomorrow? There was no procurement strategy whatsoever. And once we started to build up that volume, our small but mighty transportation team came together and we were like, okay, we need to divide this up between operations and procurement. My colleague, Rocky, who's still at Niagara today, she ran operations, I ran procurement, and a third gentleman, Ryan, who is at Niagara today as well. He was responsible for building the technology to be able to support our operations and procurement.
And what was the reason that you're opening a new facility and products coming off the line onto the trucks and so causing delays and such? Like, was some of that, like when you think big picture there, is that just navigating extreme pace of growth, or is there intentional decision making there? Like, help me understand kind of, was there a thought like, hey, maybe we need to slow down and cut back a bit? Or, what was it? Just, it was the vision of the organization to run. I mean, help me understand kind of that thought process.
That's a great question. So absolutely growth was what we were after, right? So we all know water is a pennies business. And Niagara was absolutely and still is absolutely leading the way when it comes to innovation. The best equipment in the industry, always running more bottles per minute than their competitor, being completely vertically integrated by creating their own preforms, which is the bottle before it's a bottle, before you blow it into a bottle, the ability to blow mold your own bottle. So innovation, speed, efficiency, volume is the name of the game when it comes to the private label water industry. And Niagara was going to continue to push that envelope because that's how they became so successful. And it's also like growing pains of starting up a new facility and starting up new lines is a real thing. And demand exceeded supply. Demand continues to exceed supply for Niagara. And over the years, and I would say now as a carrier for them, they have done incredible things to improve their ability to forecast. They've reduced loading delays. They introduced drop trailer. We were live load only way back in the day. I started figuring out drop trailer for them before I left. But none of it, degrading a carrier experience is not intentional for any shipper. Like, I can guarantee you that.
Of course.
What's going on inside those four walls? I'm so glad I have that experience now being on the carrier side saying, okay, guys and girls, they're not trying to be jerks. Let's talk to them, understand what's going on inside their four walls. What can we do to help them solve those problems? Because they don't want this either. They don't want the problems. Exception management is the worst, and that's what takes all of our time. So yeah, I mean, the company is all about growth, efficiency, and speed. Just when you're growing at that pace, you're going to have a lot of hiccups, and that's where a really strong procurement and carrier relation strategy is required. And that's what I learned, right? Is I was pissing people off every day, not just the carriers, but the police in the local community, right? Because we had lines. And you have to have rock solid relationships, and you have to show that you're trying and you're making improvements, or else those carriers aren't sticking around.
Because I mean, it leads to my next question, which is how do you, in a pennies business, in a business where there's just not a bunch of margin on the table, how do you be a shipper of choice? How do you be a good partner to carriers, knowing you can't offer them the juicy rates that they're necessarily looking for? And volume is certainly part of the answer. But help me think about that a little bit.
I'd say number one is transparency. You got to be transparent with your providers, and don't even try to pull the wool over their eyes. And transparency leads to more opportunity for you both. So I have a great example of one of our key customers that we were trying to figure out, how do we reduce the total cost of ownership from the manufacturing line to the store shelf? Because we were the highest volume item going through their supply chain. And that's a big number, right? If we're going through their DCs and then going from on their route trucks to their stores, and they're just doing this multiple times a day with water, that's silly. So how do I be? So what I did was I was like being transparent with my carriers, my issues with my customer. And ultimately, my main carrier, myself, and my customer spent multiple weeks devising a new direct-to-store program that created more opportunity for that carrier, and reduced the total cost of ownership for both Niagara and our joint customer. So that's just one example of where transparency just leads to, and the carrier feels bought in. They can tell their driver, like that's the thing, the driver piece, right? They can tell their drivers the why. They can tell their drivers, oh, we're going to do this new thing to help with that bad thing, and you're going to benefit. So, I mean, transparency, I can't say it enough, and being authentic, I think, goes hand in hand with that. To always, and then last but not least, being available for your carriers. I think we've all probably experienced where a customer may not be as available as we need them to be. But I always thought that it was wildly important that if a carrier reached out to me, that either I got back to them right away or somebody else on my team, and I made sure that they were taken care of.
I think that's a great mindset. So, all right, we spent a lot of time on Niagara. Let's move on to Molson. So you made the move from water to beer and spent 4 to 5 years at a company that became one of my favorite customers in the last few years. Let's talk about your time at Molson. How are things different? What did you learn in your time there? What was your role too? Give us some of that.
Absolutely.
Insight.
So made the choice to jump from Niagara to Molson, given the change in where I lived. So, I mean, one lesson there is, like I said, I think towards the beginning is, definitely look out for number one. And my husband and I were hell-bent on living in Colorado and living the mountain life. And it came to a point where we were like, if we don't do this, if we don't take a risk and take a jump, we're just never going to do it. Like we have to, we've been hammering our careers for 9, almost 10 years. And I, this drives some people, my husband, kind of crazy sometimes. I'm a firm believer in good things happen to good people. And I'm like, it'll be fine. We're good people, and so we made the jump, went to Colorado. I got super lucky. Niagara said, hey, just come here a lot until you find we know this isn't going to be forever, but I stayed with Niagara for just over a year, and went to Ontario almost every other week for about a year. So the love is strong there for sure. But then found the opportunity at Molson Coors. And what I'll say as well is I took a big step back career wise. And so this was a really hard decision. So at Niagara, I was responsible for all carrier relations, all carrier procurement, big spend. I've had a lot of visibility in the organization. Absolutely, really, really on a good track at Niagara. Molson Coors, really great opportunity to learn tons of new things, but I was responsible for 2 breweries, just over the road transportation. And so it was a really hard decision for me. I'm like, am I really stepping back? And that's when I started to learn about, learn to lean into what I call like unofficial mentors. So I know people talk about mentors all the time, and some people struggle to like, ask somebody or have a cadence with them. But the mindset I've taken is I can have a lot of mentors if they're unofficial, right? And if I stay in touch with them periodically and ask them questions, and that's what I ended up doing to help me make the decision to move over to Molson. Asking a lot of different people about like how does this look, right? I was still thinking about how other people would see this change,
Perceived it.
and me being the face of Niagara procurement, right? To like going down, and I got a lot of really good advice about the company culture at Molson Coors is fantastic. You'll be super happy. It's an amazing opportunity to join a public company. It'll give you lots of different experience. It's so different than water. I'm like, sure. I'm like, it's heavy beverage. I can do that. My eyes closed, but they were all right. And I'm so glad I listened to them. I have lasting friendships at Molson Coors. A couple of people on the Denver Transportation Club board are part of my Molson Coors family. I couldn't ask for more in that role, or in that experience. As far as my role, I started, like I said, over the road transportation, outbound beer for 2 breweries. Urbandale, California, which is no longer not operating, and then Albany, Georgia. Albany, Georgia, I learned so much down there. That one's you smirk a little. That one is quite an animal, but was a very, very good learning experience.
I smirk at Albany because of my own path to being able to haul for Molson Coors. Kelsey
Mm-hmm.
P, who's now I think with Dell, but she was in charge of letting in, or frankly, she was more in charge of telling new prospective carriers no, at least for the few years that I was pursuing. And I spent 3 years personally reaching out to her, and she would let me participate in the mini bids. But never award me any loads. And so each mini bid, and this was every month or two, maybe every 2 months, I would get another mini bid, and I would bid normal rates. I would lose. And so next time I'm like, I got to go more aggressive. I'd bid a little more aggressive. I'd lose. And of all the facilities, and this is before I knew anything about the freight, right? I mean, I only had the OD pairs. I had never hauled for them. And this is just kind of a thought on brokers and pursuing business. But I spent 2.5 years bidding on these mini bids and progressively pricing cheaper and cheaper and cheaper until, and Albany, Georgia was the facility I thought this is going to be the easiest one for me to cover freight out of, outside of produce season. It's southern Georgia, like there's, not a ton of freight down there. And so like I was at a point where I was pricing like Albany, Georgia to Florida for, it was like 300 miles, and I was pricing like $500 all in, knowing I was going to get my ass kicked. But I was like, just get me in the network. And it took 3 years. Ironically, I do remember, I'll never forget this, because she made a point to tell me, she's like, well, we only let one broker in recently, and it was Convoy, and you guys aren't like different enough like them. And I was telling her at the time, I was like, we're different from them, but in a way that you're not realizing yet. Like and so there was a little bit when she finally let us in, I gave her a little bit of an I told you so, because I think Convoy got kicked out for failing, whatever, who knows what, it didn't work with them. But and then obviously we know what happened after that. But I mean, I will always respect Molson Coors. There's a lesson in just shippers in general, and it's typically the harder it is for you to get in with the shipper, the more time and effort you have to put in to earn an opportunity, the better partner they end up being. I mean, it speaks to they really respect the relationships they have with their carriers and their brokers, and they're not just going to nilly-willy add somebody new because you sent them an email. And it's the respect for incumbents that I think those of us that have worked in this industry and worked really hard for our customers, that's what we really appreciate. And, there's two sides of that coin, because as a non-incumbent, it just takes a lot longer to become an incumbent and to get an opportunity. But once we did, I remember it was like hair on fire. They had a lot of challenges out of Colorado with, I can't remember what the issue was, but like overnight we were doing like a ton of volume for them out of there, just as like a last minute support. And I love that part of the brokerage is when you get an opportunity and a shipper really needs help, and it's like, who are they going to? And you raise your hand at the right time, and then all of a sudden they're coming to you, and you're just showing up, and your team's getting fired up at these new opportunities. I mean, that was my favorite part of brokering, was the hair on fire, last minute opportunities, and not because you could like make more money in them, just because you got to play hero. I think that's like part of how I fell in love with this industry, was just my freaking father like forced me to be the guy, because it's like, who are you gonna force in your company to show up and work on 4th of July? Probably your kid who's sitting in the pool right now messing around having a beer. Like, get the hell out of the office and go cover those Coke loads, because I can't just ask a random employee to do it. But that I'm on a rant here, but go ahead.
I love
Let me
that
shut
so
up and
much,
let you
because
talk
on
for
the
a
flip
second.
side, I loved calling for favors. And that's the relationship piece. Like I said, like the authenticity, the transparency. I mean, even though like I was over procurement, but because I had such good relationships and I wasn't that procurement person that was like, your rates suck, email, right? Like I was a conversation, and I'm not trying to like generalize, but right, like you do get feedback that's pretty black and white. I loved calling carriers like, you're that, be like, oh my god, because I mean, we
Help.
had those 400 load Fridays. I mean, you guys know it, and we were just smiling and dialing for trucks. Then you did the same. And that's part, to your point, that's part of the addicting piece. And the other thing that resonated with me when you said hair on fire, literally like the day I walked into Molson Coors, my actual boss's boss at the time, who now is over at Constellation, he said, we can like, your hair is on fire. You're gonna need to tone it down at Coors. Like we're not running around like crazy people like you were at Niagara. Cause I was just like, well, we can do better with these rates and the service and the thing and the that. Cause I mean, at Niagara, we were just hammered. And while I felt strongly about relationship, Molson Coors taught me a whole nother level of loyalty. I mean, they had carriers that were carriers built off of beer distributors. So like over 100 years of a relationship, that I needed to be patient with and learn about, and not be calling the shots. Right. So that was like one of my big learnings of going to Molson Coors, is to, one, douse the hair on fire slightly. You still need it. I still have it. Don't worry. But take time to listen a whole lot more. And super valuable lesson. And I quite honestly not only learned it on the trucking side of Molson Coors, but most of my career at Molson Coors was in a space that I had no experience in. So following leading transportation for those two breweries, I got the opportunity to be what we called our multimodal manager, which covered intermodal, boxcar, cross-border, ocean, and our reusable asset management. So both the purchase and the maintenance of kegs and pallets and dunnage that we reused, but also the reverse logistics of it. So a space I had no clue what I was doing, and came to this experienced team. I mean, I had three people that have been at Molson Coors for 35 years, and take a back seat and listen and learn. But then also the expectation that it's going to be improved, right? We're going to ship more intermodal. The breweries are going to be super into blocking and bracing loads. We're going to do more boxcar like we used to do, right? We filled in the rail pit at Albany, but we're going to do more boxcar out of Albany. So lots of challenges. So not only learning the people and having patience for that, but learning the modes. And trust me, as a female in the industry, going to talk to a railroad, I was shaking in my boots, right? I didn't know enough about the railroads, and just being very much outnumbered. All of that was extremely humbling and an amazing experience.
Let's talk about that for a minute. Being a female in the industry. Is it? So this is definitely an industry that is, by the numbers, way more male than female. And I think that's true at every level, at the executive level, at the front lines, on the brokerage side, especially on the shipper side, I would probably say too as well.
Yeah, I would say
not so much like, go ahead.
Yeah.
Not so much like at an organizational level like Molson Coors. It's not like those companies are more male than female. I mean, maybe they are a little bit, but not as strong as in the freight part 100%. Of the business.
Yeah.
And I'm just curious, is it more challenging as a female inherently because of that dynamic?
Because of
just the sheer numbers?
For sure. But in my experience, it very much depends on the environment of like your organizational environment. Because that's where you start, like in your four walls of your organization as a female, and certainly anybody, that's where you start to build your confidence, and that's how it ultimately gets displayed externally. And so I was super fortunate at Niagara and Molson Coors to have an environment that I didn't feel like I didn't have the same opportunities as my male counterparts. Honestly, I felt like I maybe even had more opportunities because I was different. And of course, again, to your point, it was a shipper environment. So it was a little less, I don't know if aggressive or rough around the edges is the word, than your other side of the fence, the service provider side of the fence. But I would say that I was extremely lucky with the coworkers, the bosses I had, essentially the family that I had at both Niagara and Molson Coors, that let me be authentic, be aggressive without judgment, exhibit those more male type behaviors without any downfall that I really saw, and encouraged me to be in those environments. I mean, certainly meeting with carriers, all of them were men. I certainly had many poor experiences, but my peers and my boss and my colleagues didn't make a thing of it, right? It was just, no, Alyssa still has this responsibility. She's still going to make the call. That was shitty, but we're not going to dwell on it. Let's move on and continue to develop a really strong strategy and move forward with it.
So can you elaborate a little bit? What an example? You don't have to give details of like individuals, of course, but I just, for the audience sake, I haven't really talked about this before. And it's partially a me thing, because it's like, when I have a female guest, I don't want to focus on that because it's like, I feel like that's wrong. But at the same time, I think this is interesting to talk about and worth talking about in our industry, in that it is a generally male dominated industry. But that doesn't mean that males should have more opportunity or should be able to act a certain way that a female shouldn't be able to act, and it should be seen one way or a different way. So I am just curious, like, what is an example of what a poor experience looks like, and how do you deal with it?
Yeah, so I mean, I have two that I can lean into that are a little bit different. Like, I'll never forget one carrier meeting at Niagara where it was myself and a male counterpart, actually, our friend Paul, who I worked with for a very long time, in a meeting with two gentlemen, leaders from a carrier, and while I was the senior person in the room on the Niagara side, neither of them would look at me or address me, even though I would answer questions and address them back. And that certainly put a fire under me with a few different reactions. And within the meeting, I did not express, any type of outward communication around my disappointment, or how I felt in general about how they treated me. But following certainly was pretty vocal internally about this type of behavior, because it wasn't the first time, and it wouldn't be the last time. And to be honest, I was at a point in my career where wasn't really sure how to navigate that, except to continue to behave the way I thought I should, versus taking a step back. And I think that's what happens a lot is women experience something like that, especially early on in their career, and they don't have that support system around them. So they kind of take a step back the next time, and they don't think that they should have that seat at that table.
It feeds a little bit of that like there's kind of this built up, that this person across the table is thinking it, it's not true, that you don't belong in that seat and that you shouldn't have the power you do, but it feeds that little insecurity when they do. And then I guess what you're saying is like you have two choices then. You either succumb to the insecurity and let them create a reality that's not really true, or you say, fuck that. Like I am here because I deserve to be here. And, I'm not going to let your belittlement or your idiocy, take away from that.
Exactly. And it doesn't mean that that's an easy thing to do. Boy, have I wrestled with insecurities, being petrified to be in certain meetings or on certain stages. But being part of organizations that have continued to give me the opportunity to practice and to build that confidence over and over and over and over again. And I continue to work on that today in my current role. I think that I would say many women aren't provided that opportunity and aren't continued to be supported along the way, which is tough, right? Because I know I speak for a lot of women in this industry, but we love to be surrounded by each other. I mean, I'll be on a call at Uber Freight, and there's 5 women, and we, high five for a quick second, then get to business, of course. But it's pretty darn cool. But I mean, lots of you, if you listen to like a women leadership panel, everyone ultimately the topic of we all lift each other up comes up, right? And we can't knock each other down. And it's hard when you're fighting for a few opportunities in a particular organization or in the industry as a whole.
And do you feel like this issue is still rampant in the industry, or it's the small minority? I mean, I don't know if quantifying it is helpful, but do you still feel like this is an issue that women face today on a day-to-day basis in our industry?
I do, but I do think there's been tremendous headway. The area that I think that we have very much lack of women is more in the operations space. I consider myself operations. Yes, we're seeing a lot more women in HR and marketing and design, like traditional, I guess, women like roles in logistics where women have moved into, or recruiting. But I do think that there's a major gap still on the operations side of the house. It's very hard to grow up in operations and continue to climb the ladder in operations. I think if we all just kind of look around and think about like leading organizations in our industry, it would be hard pressed to find a female leader on the operations side of the house. And
Huh.
I mean, like
It's
my
interesting.
second example I can jump onto real quick was
Go ahead.
my
Yeah.
experience following Molson Coors. Like all, this isn't like super widely known, but I was fired for being too disruptive. And
Not at Molson
no, not
Coors,
Molson Coors,
at
at
MicroStar.
MicroStar. And it's hard to spit that out because recovering from that from a confidence standpoint was extremely difficult. The beauty of this industry, though, like we've talked about with relationships and transparency, is the amount of outreach that I got after that of people saying, first of all, holy shit, why would anybody do that? Second of all, you want to come work here? But to go back to the experience, I was behaving like the person, not just the female, but the person that I had been the what almost 15 years of my career prior, um, acting, being authentic, speaking my mind, desiring to make change, sticking up for my team, doing all of those things that had been celebrated in those other organizations, but was considered threatening, even though my peers as males could do those things, but it was considered threatening at a different leadership organization. So I learned a heck of a lot there. That was my first, like, whoa, being a woman in this industry can really hurt experience.
And in being fired, they said you were being too disruptive.
Yes, I was like, I have to have a
And
reason.
by definition, that was like speaking your mind and having ideas and advocating for change in areas where change was needed, like things like that.
Nailed it. Typical.
The very things that had helped you progress your career for 15 years.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
it works for
I
some, it doesn't work for others, and I learned that the hard way.
mean, listen, you're my 33rd episode, I think 32 or 33. So I've had 32 guests plus maybe 4 or 5 because I do the panel thing every now and then. This is the first time ever. So I reached out to you on LinkedIn after, Bob had put your name out there and someone else maybe too. And I just said, hey, want to do an episode? And you said, absolutely, let's get it. And within a week or so, you sent me an email with a pitch of this is what we should talk about. Here's my bio. Here are topics. This would make a great episode for your audience. I've never had that. And I just think it speaks volumes to kind of your character and who you are and how you advocate for yourself, which is a term or a concept that I've heard a lot, especially I mean, everyone should be advocating for themselves, but I feel like it comes up a lot more for women because in our industry, they don't always have someone advocating for them. Can you talk a little bit, like, is that intentional or this was just by happenstance or this is just how you've developed your skill set or your approach to life and business and relationships?
I mean, it's entirely intentional and something that I've had to work at. So, I mean, you nailed it with referencing self-advocacy and how important it is. And you have to make yourself do it. And I've certainly learned it over the years from all of these unofficial mentors, folks that I saw do it for themselves or pushed me to do it. And quite honestly, a lot of that too is my life at home with my husband. I mean, he knows what I face. I mean, we've been together since we were 21 years old. So he's seen this little girl go through this industry. I mean, I'm 40, like for 20 years, and go and be a monster shipper, right, with all this power, and kind of course, he hears everything that I've experienced, the ups and the downs of being in the industry, just generally, but then of course, as a female, and he doesn't let me get away with not advocating for myself, which, I mean, I wouldn't be where I am without that type of support. But you got to have somebody that's pushing you, um, and then the other person that I'm gonna reference again is Bob. I mean, coming into Uber Freight, I'll say he's taught me a lot of things, but one is the art of the pitch. And he is a grand.
You're telling me Bob taught you the art of Bob taught you how to sell. You're
Right?
losing me quick here. I've been dialed in for an hour, locked into every word. You start telling me Bob Chappie has taught you how to sell. You're losing me. I'm sorry. I'm just kidding. I have to reiterate this. Bob is a good friend of mine, and the nature of our friendship and a lot of our friendships in this circle is just constantly ragging on one another and talking shit. So
I have a great story about that.
Go ahead.
So when deciding to come to Uber Freight, I had the opportunity to go to be a shipper again. And I had just had my second baby. It was, what was it? It was July, August. I had just, so August-ish of 2020, right? Nothing's good. And I had the opportunity to go to Uber Freight or to go back being a shipper. And my experience at MicroStar, Redwood, I was like, they're just not, it wasn't terrible, but it wasn't like amazing, right? I had amazing Molson Coors Niagara, right? And I was like, maybe I just need to go be a shipper again, do what I know what I do, you know? And the world is in a very bad space. Let me just go do what I want to do. And so I called Bob and I was like, I'm going to turn down this role at Uber Freight to go lead fleet strategy and partnerships. And I'm going to go take the shipper role. And he's like, can you give me just a few minutes? 2 hours later, done deal. I'm signing the deal at Uber Freight, and I'm declining the offer from one of my old Molson Coors buddies to go be a shipper at another place that he moved to.
I didn't know Bob had it in him.
Yeah, and then
no, I appreciate that.
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I'm just thinking about the concept of, you had two great shipper experiences that were your comfort zone, and you had a brokerage experience that was okay. And then you were getting this whole new kind of brokerage, maybe not, kind of different, very different thing with Uber Freight. And I just want to talk for a second because your life has been a series of foregoing on what you're comfortable with to attempt something new. The devil on the shoulder is always going to say, I don't know that it's the devil, but the anti-growth thing on your shoulder is going to say, hey, stick to what you know because it's easier, it's more comfortable. But growth doesn't happen in comfort. Growth happens in discomfort and trying new things. And I just want you to talk a little bit about how that applies to your life, and how that the impact maybe that you've been to 6 companies plus taken an important role in the Denver Transportation Company. Like, you're a busy person and have done a lot of things, taken a lot of chances, advocated for yourself, bet on yourself. How has that impacted your life? How should our audience be thinking about betting on themselves and taking new chances and opportunities?
I think it's a fantastic topic and a great question. And, as you were walking through that, I was thinking, where did this originate? Because it just doesn't, I don't think you're just kind of, maybe some people are born with it, but I personally had to work at it because I always been a, less of a outgoing, maybe that's the right word, outgoing person. So, I remember my mom saying, you need to call to order pizza. Like, you have to call. And I'm like, no, I'm not calling.
It's scary.
So scary. And like, who's going to give him?
What if they ask about toppings? Who's
going to give him the money when he gets here? Like,
Yes, that's what if you're not in the room?
Yeah. So, and that's been me forever. And I think being pushed to do that, like, that's how it had to start. Like, I'm not going to say that I was like, oh, well, I realized if I try new things, I'm going to do better. Not at all. I was certainly pushed to do that in the family business for sure. Right. But then, I owe a lot to Niagara. Like, you sink or swim. they expect excellence. I mean, I'm sure everybody you've met there, they are just tip top, not only super smart, super capable, expect excellence across the board. And I mean, you can't just like skirt around. You have to dive in. And once I started diving into these new experiences, it started getting addicting, to your point. Doesn't mean everyone isn't hard or scary. I mean, I'll go back and reference the last couple of years of Uber Freight. I've been given the opportunity to do a lot of panels for women. I've spoken at our customer conference, our carrier conference, etc. I Before each opportunity, I'm nervous. I'm preparing, and yes, has it gotten a heck of a lot easier? But it's still something that I have to push myself for. But I know based on all of these previous experiences of pushing that it really helps. So like when I reference like get out and find your local club, that's how you start, right? Is like you put yourself in an uncomfortable situation of meeting new people, and then cool things happen, right? You make a new friend, you find a new business partner, and then you just have to do it over and over and over again. So I just like, that's why you see all the moves probably is because I just try to put myself out there, and you just see what happens. So you can always say no. And lastly on this thread here is action is always better than inaction. I can't say that enough. So if you like, I recently read the book, The Confidence Code, which holy cow, boy, did I wish I read that. Like read that 15, 20 years ago. I'm still glad I read it now. And I encourage, I mean, men as well, but certainly women at any point in your career, read that book. And, what you get out of it is, in summary, is think less, act more, and be authentic. You build confidence because you're taking action. And I cannot stress that enough, because you'll get addicted to it, and good things will happen.
There's so much we can hit on here. I want to first, there's something you said about Niagara that just really resonated with me. And it's the concept of, and I just think this is, if I was a kid graduating college, or I was someone stuck in a role somewhere and I wanted to leave and find a new job, two things I would look for. One are fast growth companies, young, fast growth companies. And two are, and I don't know the right way to describe this, it might be crazy CEOs or crazy leaders or over the top, but like people who demand excellence, because it puts you in an environment, one, where there's high expectations of you, and two, where there's a lot going on and a lot of opportunity in front of you. That is where greatness is molded. Like I have seen, because we had this at Mola, we had a very high expectation of our people, and like I used to get feedback that it was like some people were like, "Yeah, you're kind of scary. We were a little afraid of you, but at the same time, we just didn't want to let you down." And what it does is it like forces people to be at their best, and it like tests you. And like you've seen this for people who played sports, like playing on great teams with great coaches who demanded the most of you. Like that's how people grow. And so people became stronger and better at their whatever their practice was or their art was. And I just think it was a weird thing as you were talking about that with Niagara, like that it reminded me of what we tried to do at Molo. And I think one of the things that our people came to appreciate over time was the high bar that was set, and but it's a high bar with low opportunity is not great, but a high bar with high opportunity is okay. I've met the bar. The business is growing now. I'm getting promoted because of it, and you start to see the rewards of your actions. So that just was a thought there that
Yeah,
jogged my memory.
I love to jump in on that in both my first place, Niagara, and then here at Uber Freight. I'll never forget. I mean, Ashley Dorno, who is one of the executives at Niagara. I reported to him for a long time, and every meeting that I went into with him, I was like, all right, is he going to ask me a question I can't answer? Like that's when I learned how to prepare early on, preparing for meetings. And he just expected excellence, but in a way that was that showed you that he cared, and he wanted better for everybody, right? He wanted us all to perform better. And so we just had that mentality that, all right, if we're going to present something to him, it is going to be our best. And you know what? He's going to ask it to be better, ask for it to be better. And that was just the mentality. And, that's when I started to learn about that behavior. And then when I think about Uber Freight, I mean, the connection between these brilliant technology minds and these logistics professionals, I've said this a number of times to different people, is I have to go into work every day with my A game. Like, there's no just like kicking it. Especially when I first started. I mean, or Bob, but Bob did tell me, he's like, your brain's going to be stretched in ways you just don't realize. I'm like, sure, whatever. So I start meeting with the tech team, and my brain just starts like expanding for sure. And I'm like, I have got to have my shit together to go to these meetings and be super prepared, ready to ask questions, think super critically. All right, what's our next step? Have an objective of the meeting, and what do I want my outcome to be? And that's still how it is today. And that's, like, to your point, is, you got to have a CEO that is, I was thinking ambitious when you're going through the words, but I love crazy as well. Crazy ambitious together makes it very positive.
Crazy ambitious, because there's a wrong kind of crazy that's a little different. I think there's a difference between someone who has a very high bar, high expectations, perfectionist, because like they're an asshole and like they just want, things to be perfect because, that's all they can focus on. And the better version is when they do it because they know that those results align to the mission and vision that achieve further results that benefit everybody. And it's understanding that when we don't accomplish those things, when we don't do this the right way, it impairs all of us. It prevents all of us from seeing future opportunity and growth in the business. And the latter is what you want. You want someone who like clearly understands the things that an organization needs to do to be successful, and they drive it home day in and day out, and they make it clear that if we don't do these things, we will not win. We will not be successful. And like when you have someone like that leading the org, or a team of people like that, that's when you've found a good home.
You just want to get behind them. And you're like, heck yeah, like,
yes,
let's, like, the team sports thing. Like, strong advocate of team sports. I like to find out if people that I'm interviewing played on team sports, things like that. Like, it's that feeling of, we are a team and we are striving to win. Like, winning is the best. And
winning is the best.
Like, who doesn't want to win? Like, come on. Like, if you don't want to win, I don't know. I don't know what to say. But I think most people want to win, especially in our industry, whether you're a shipper, a carrier, whatever. And getting behind a leader that can effectively communicate what winning looks like, and how to get there, and able to identify where we need to level up to really win, it's just fun. It's just fun.
Yeah, I agree. So let's get into Uber then. You joined Uber in mid to late 2020, thanks to our mutual friend, Bob. This is the most Bob's ever been talked about on a podcast, I think 7 times. So this is interesting because I've had some communication with the Uber marketing team about doing an Uber episode.
Whoa.
And we got close, and then I got punted. And so I don't want to get you in trouble. So I'm not going to ask you anything that I might ask Lior. And I'm hopeful that we get Lior on the podcast at some point.
Well, they all know I'm here. Don't worry.
Good. Okay. That's good. Because, I was just punted to, I think, late Q3. So I think I can reach back out and hopefully get a Lior episode on the books. I'm not going to ask you about profitability, I promise. Um, whoops.
Just slip it
No, but
right in.
you've you've joined a very unique organization that has had a massive impact on the space, one that undoubtedly has brought innovation to the space. That is something that I think people conflate two things. One is technology companies coming in and subsidizing shipper costs to grow at any means necessary. And whether or not that was part of the Uber playbook at some point is irrelevant to this conversation. But also is leveraging brilliant minds and technologists paired with people like Bob and other freight-minded people to drive innovation. And I talked about this with Rob Haddock on his episode about Coca-Cola, and just as an example of innovation that Uber has brought would be the concept of facility ratings and leveraging drivers who are already on an app that are familiar with a rating type system to give instantaneous type feedback regarding the experience that they had with specific facility. That is just something that didn't exist before Uber came along. And I believe for sure that adds value to a shipper and to their facility network. So I'm not coming on here as a hater. I've been a hater in the past. Some could call it maturity and growth, but that's not what we're doing today. So let's talk about your journey to Uber. You made the decision to join, obviously, kind of with Bob kind of in your ear. What was the role you were coming into, and what's the role you're doing today?
Absolutely. So I too was hesitant about Uber. So I actually shot Uber down at Molson Coors. I was like, how are you going to know they have beer permits? And they're like, oh, shit. Ultimately, now we are a partner, of course, with Molson Coors. But I distinctly remember being like, this is never going to work. But look who's here now, eating my words. You call that's
4 years
growth,
later,
right? Like we talked about maturity.
It's growth, maturity, very demure.
But even when I was evaluating coming on, I was hesitant. So the role that I came on into was running our fleet strategy engagement, and that was as an individual contributor. So going from leading teams for many years to just being me driving strategy. So again, another risk. Am I stepping back? What are people going to think? Especially, what are the fleets going to think? Right? I mean, who hated Uber more than the fleets? Like, they're like, oh, sure. You think you're going to be able to haul all the loads you need to haul via owner operators on your stupid app? They didn't all say that, but trust me, I valued my part.
You're supposed to be advocating for the business. I'm just kidding.
This is a story. It's about greatness.
You're doing great. You're doing great. You're going to get there.
Well, that's my role was a thing. I mean, we're happy now.
That's why they brought you.
Anyways, so I called fleets before I took the role as well. And I was like, if I call you when I'm there, will you pick up and will you integrate with us? And they're like, for you, sure. I'm like, yes, okay. But some of them were like, there's a bad rap in the fleet space about Uber Freight. There's not a lot of tools for fleets to partner with them. Brokers in general, we want to talk to somebody, all of those things that we all know, right? So again, another time where not only did Bob pitch me like a star, but I was like, okay, I've been able to impact the industry as a shipper, just in my four walls and my facilities, but this is a true opportunity to impact the industry in a big way, right? Like you said it, right? Bringing facility ratings, democratizing via upfront pricing, all sorts of things that, right, wrong, or indifferent, Uber Freight certainly has made a massive impact on the industry. And I was like, this is cool. And I've always been super into the tech side of logistics. So it got me really excited. So came in running our fleet strategy. So what that means is, okay, what are we not doing right with fleets from an ops perspective, from a communication perspective? How do we engage them better? And then, of course, how do we lean in with technology when it comes to integrating with our TMSs via API, et cetera? So it was super fun. Spending time with fleets and seeing their operating systems. And I'm like, I should have done this as a shipper as well, right? To see what their challenges are, like available loads, available trucks. How do I match them up? Holy cow, this is so archaic. How do we integrate an API to where they can search and book Uber Freight loads within their TMS and reduce that friction of all the different tabs, right? So all of that was super interesting to me. And to lace that all together also with like, okay, I know the problems that they're facing from a shipper perspective. I know that we're a stopgap in the middle to ensure that they continue to drive revenue on their assets. So for me, it was like the full picture. And then I get to like partner with product people that are super smart to build cool stuff for fleets. Like, this is amazing. So that was my initial role. And within, I think, 8 or 10 months, I started to build a team, and then ultimately led the fleet strategy and operations team. So everybody that managed the day-to-day, like day-to-day carrier sales, an area that I was like, what? I knew nothing about, but day-to-day carrier sales with our national fleet partners and our regional fleet partners was part of my team. So I got to learn a lot about all of those pain points and what's required to be a broker from a carrier perspective, which again opened my eyes, because I mean, back in the shipper day, I was like, oh, all my lanes that I contract with you contract to an underlying carrier and off you go. And that is not true at all.
Not so much. The good ones do a decent amount of it, but it's certainly not anywhere near one-to-one.
Yeah. So learning lessons always. And so I spent almost 2 years on the fleet strategy side of the house. And then we had some reorganization occur in January of last year. So that's January of 2023. I got the opportunity to take on our Power Loop division. So Power Loop is our power only service offering, where we have almost 1,000 trailers in our Uber Freight trailer fleet. So we long-term lease trailers, and we leverage our brokerage arm to power those trailers. So that's where I live now.
And what does that team look like that you have in the Power Loop group?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So because it's an expansion organization, and I'm sure you can understand, operating assets in an automated brokerage space is a challenge. We do have a separate team that we work cohesively with the other teams. We have a separate team that is experienced in managing those assets. So we have a group of people that we refer to as our network managers. So they're responsible for a set of trailers in a specific region. We have a specific carrier sales team for Power Loop as well, to partner with the power only carriers and ensure that we're getting loads both directions. So we're not running empty all the time. We have a specific asset management team that's focused on our telematics and our repairs and all of that. So we have we actually have 2 people commercially focused on Power Loop. So we have our own little group of about 35 people that work on Power Loop, but we partner in the organization intensely, and we've built a ton of product within our operating tools to support the business as well.
And that I just did an episode last week with Shannon Breen from Freight Mana, which is another organization that has a large trailer fleet that they operate, which is, as I said in that episode, pretty unique in the industry. It's becoming more, I don't want to use the word common, but brokers are making more effort to do so. The challenge for a startup like his that's 3 years old is it's really hard to effectively operate a fleet of trailers if you don't have thousands of loads a day. The benefit for you is you have thousands of loads a day, maybe tens of thousands. I don't know how many, but it's a lot. Can you talk a little bit about what are the biggest challenges that you've run into leading Power Loop since you've taken it over? Like, what are those challenges that someone who's a traditional broker or maybe a shipper wouldn't necessarily be privy to without having this conversation?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, I've learned a ton about assets. And to all my fleet friends, thank you for everything you've done for me. Um, I've taken a humble pill for sure when it comes to managing assets, and I'm only managing the trailers. I don't have the driver and the truck to worry about, but it's it's given me a brand new appreciation about how challenging it is to be the asset player in this space, and how abundantly important that transparency from the shipper is. Because I mean, revenue on your asset and continuous revenue on your asset is 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 number one. So that utilization piece and figuring that out isn't easy. I mean, trucking companies have mastered it throughout the years, but we all know their operating ratios are super tight. Um, and one slip up in how you're managing a fleet or a load that you take into the wrong location can blow things up for a month for you. So number one, learned a ton just generally about asset management in our industry. Number two, which you talk about, is running an asset business in an automated / digital brokerage, is like has many challenges, but also has many benefits. Like you mentioned, thousands and thousands of loads, like easy peasy. We're going to utilize the hell out of these things, right? We got so much to choose from. But there's so much automation in there. You kind of got to break it down and make sure that you are getting the right load with the right appointment and the right payload and the long list of things that you need to make sure you have, and you have to make sure you have it consistently. So you have to insert people to make sure, dear shipper, I'm expecting 2 loads a day. You're giving me 1 load every other day. What's happening? But when we have around 6,000 customers, and you have that many customers in your marketplace, and loads are flying off the board, it makes it really challenging. What's exciting about what we're doing is we have buy-in from the entire organization, from Leor to everybody. That Power Loop is a core part of our strategy. We're a small part of the business today, but it's a core part of our strategy. Our shippers want more of it, and so we have the latitude and the capability to work super collaboratively with the partners across the organization to make those changes and make things happen. We're not like swimming upstream and fighting every day, fighting a fight to try to make it work. Everybody understands the task at hand. And I fundamentally believe that it's going to be a very large offering from us moving forward.
So that last point you made is a really important one. When I think about there's a relevant comparison I'm going to make, but what you're talking about with Power Loop is not traditional brokerage, and so it's not even traditional marketplace automated brokerage like Uber's accustomed to. So when you have this organization that's becoming mature and at least has processes that everyone has been accustomed to and just an SOP, a way of doing things, and you throw in this big investment with 1,000 trailers that is going to disrupt that flow, it's really important that the organization is end-to-end bought in. Because if they're not, you're going to run into issues where, okay, this operations team is not accommodating an appointment change or a necessary ship on this day versus that day, whatever. And I'm not saying you should be sacrificing customer requirements. That example I just gave might have suggested that. That's not my point. What I am saying, though, is you need buy-in across the org to move something like this forward. The comparison I'm thinking of at Molo was we had a dedicated fleet that we were able to develop with a carrier where they gave us, I think by the end it was maybe 25 trucks a day that we owned. And we were paying for them whether we used them or not. And that to me speaks to a level of trust between a carrier and a broker that is typically unheard of or very, very rare. Now, other than that, we were a standard brokerage. So, to the carrier reps that are working on loads or the operators who are just, managing their customers, when you throw in this dedicated group all of a sudden, or this dedicated relationship, it's like, wait a second, we're prioritizing that? Like, so I should make changes as a result of this? And the answer is yes. It's hey, we're furthering our mission to be the best possible partner we can be with our carriers. That takes making a change. And what you're talking about is Uber being able to further its mission and be a better partner to potential owner ops who don't want to have their own trailers. It's a way to maybe be more efficient, to manage more drop trailer business, whatever it may be. You're supporting your network, your carriers, your customers in a better way. But for the individual contributor who's just a carrier rep or an operations rep, they don't get more compensation. They don't get more anything. They maybe even get a little bit slighter of a headache because they have to make a change to accommodate. That's where it's critically important to have aligned buy-in across the org and for everyone to understand there's a reason we're doing this. And we need everybody bought in to make it happen.
Absolutely. And, I was smiling through that because we have those individual conversations with folks that are like, what is this again? Why am I doing this? And that's quite honestly the first year, and even so now, but definitely the first year was a roadshow of why Powerloop, not just externally, mostly internally, and even to like our commercial team, right? Where they're always excited to sell something new and shiny, right? But they're like, are you sure? Is this going to work? Like, rightfully so, right? Poking to make sure that they're going to get what they expect and that we can operate it within the constraints of our organization. So truly a roadshow of building trust within the organization, even though it is coming from the top, which is great, helps so much. But I mean, at each level of the organization, we are daily building trust. Even when we bring on a new customer, that say is one of our transportation management customers, right? Those are our coveted. I mean, all customers are amazing, but like if you're like a 10-year transportation management customer, that's a different deal, right? And if Powerloop wins some lanes with them, I mean, we have to earn their trust as well, like our internal teammates on the transportation management side. So, I mean, they hit the nail on the head. It's a lot of internal awareness and coordination to make it work. But when it works pretty damn good.
Yep. Okay. What else do you want to give me on Uber? I don't mean that like a dirt. I just mean like, I just, I got very focused on that conversation. I forgot to think of another question. And let me phrase it this way. Uber is one of the biggest players in our industry today, one of the most unique. I want to understand from your perspective, what's the best thing about working at Uber and what's the biggest challenge about working at Uber? One and one.
That's a great question. So the best thing about working at Uber is we won't stop pushing to be better, whether it's through technology and innovation or it's hardcore operations or it's employee experience. It's just this unrelenting desire to be better for ourselves and to be better for the industry. And I know there's lots of opinions and lots of press, good, bad, or indifferent, about the organization and how we've changed and, like you said, profitability. But I can tell you on the inside, I mean, I've been there for 4 years and it's the best gig I've ever had. I mean, I talked greatly about other employers and they were fantastic, but the opportunity to pave your own way and advocate for yourself, like we've talked about, and try new things and fail and then try again. And the access to the brilliant minds that we have, not just on the operations and traditional transportation team wise, but the technology side. I mean these are uber technology people. It's a whole different ballgame. If you're willing to expose yourself and meet lots of people at our organization, I mean, the world's your oyster. And so we're not, we don't settle. It is how I'll sum it up. What makes me, I get up every day and be like, we're gonna go, and my team will resonate with that for sure. Like, here she is again. And I'd say the most challenging thing, I mean, the integration has been really tough, with Transplace, right? And I think it's hard. It's hard.
Big integrations are really freaking
really
hard. And that's $1 billion integration.
Yeah, it is no joke. And it's been 2 years, and it's been a long 2 years for everybody. And to do it in like such a terrible market at the same time, like, could you have a worse table set, but the resiliency of the team throughout it has been fantastic. I mean, of course, we've had some rough days and some dark times, but we just like continue to be like, hey, remember why we're doing this? It's gonna be great. And I can't say enough about where we are now from a leadership perspective. I have never been more excited, and I put my shipper hat on all the time because it's super fun to give people a hard time internally. But when I see what we're creating from a shipper perspective, someone that's I bought transportation management, I bought TMSs, I bought obviously truckload, intermodal. Like, I bought all the things, and I'm like, if we can't sell one of these things that we got to a shipper, then we got problems, right? Like, we really are bringing together a really strong go-to-market, and have a suite of services that we can find something to partner with a shipper on, no matter what. So it's been a journey, but we really are just getting started. I can tell you that.
Great answers. This has been awesome. So I'm gonna do one of two things here. You can leave us with a piece of advice, which I'm gonna make you do anyways as we go. Or are there any topics we didn't hit on that you want to jam on for a minute?
The only thing we didn't hit on was being a mom.
Being a
in
mom?
the industry.
Let's talk about that.
Yeah, let's. You want to ask any questions, or you want me to just talk about it?
Yeah, so you're a mother of two. Your 7-year-old is currently homesick with a fever, but he's getting his sleep because he's a good boy. Your other's in school. So 7 means 2017. So you were at Molson, and then you were at Uber, or you were just before making the change?
You got it. Yeah, so I was at Redwood.
How challenging is it to be in an industry like this where you have so much, everybody has so much on their plate all the time, whether you're at a place like Molson where you've got responsibility over multiple facilities, or working in a brokerage role where you've got accounts to oversee? How hard is it to step away for 3 months at a time?
Hard.
To go do that and then come back.
Yeah, it's super hard. I'm glad we're talking about it, because I don't think it's really talked about that much. And before we hopped on live, we were talking about Charlie from CS Recruiting, and how I follow her on LinkedIn and absolutely love everything she writes, and she talks about her 3 boys all the time. But I don't think I truly don't think it's out there enough that being a mom, or a parent in general, but definitely a mom with the whole maternity leave thing is a challenge. And for me, coming back was the hardest part. Not only are you leaving this tiny, like, they're still tiny, they're still so small, even though they're 3 or 4 months old. I mean, I got so lucky at Molson Coors. We had 16 weeks of leave, which was, really unheard of, except for the places like Uber. And so I got to be with him for, my oldest for just about 4 months. And coming back to that family oriented environment was quite possibly the best setup I could have had. I was only commuting 15 minutes out to Golden for work, and they made it easy to pump and all of the things. We had all of the niceties, but still the biggest thing that you don't see from the outside, like physically, they're like, well, she's not pregnant anymore. Like, yeah, maybe she needs to take 30 minutes here and there. But what's going on upstairs? That's what no one sees. And you're thinking about, okay, did they nap? Did they eat? Did they poop? Like, what do I need? What else do I need? Okay, I had to miss this. I had to miss pumping, so I have to push it this time, so it's going to impact ounces. And I mean, you're just like constantly the doctor's appointment for the shots, and oh, well, how will he react to the shots? Will he have a fever? Do I need to stay home? Will that work? I've got this travel. Like, you're just motoring in your head. Whereas, I mean, I distinctly remember a couple months after coming back from maternity leave at Molson Coors, I'm sitting at a meeting with all men, and I'm like, they're all laser focused on this meeting, and I have a lot going on upstairs. Like, I remember being like having that narrative in my head while focusing, and I think that is just it's overlooked, not only by anybody, not just men, right? And so, do I have a solution for that? No, I just think like it's talking about it and it might help people realize that there's so much more than just, okay, now you're back.
Yeah, I mean, as you were explaining that, I was thinking in my head, like, is there it's not a solution, but is there something that we, the industry, the employers, the coworkers can be doing, and maybe it's just mindfulness, and maybe cutting a little bit more slack in those first couple months that someone returns from maternity leave, because it's an near not impossible, but it's a really challenging situation. It's something that everybody wants to do. Not everybody, but a lot of people want to do, and they want to come back to work. And certainly working for an organization that has a great paternity, maternity leave policies helps. 16 weeks is a lot better than 4 or 6 or what. I don't know what the minimum is, but I'm just trying to think if there are other things that you would recommend people do, or things that maybe helped you navigate through that from the first to the second time around, that made life a little easier for you.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and I think 2 main things. One is awareness, right? Like you said, mindfulness of it, like ensuring that people are aware, ensuring that the manager of that person that's coming back is aware that there's a whole lot more going on. Because I don't necessarily want to be like, oh, well, we're not going to work as hard or be as awesome. We're actually going to be more awesome because our time is very tight. Like, when we have care for our kids, we are hammering. Because when we don't, like when they're ours, we are with the kids. So there's lots of studies about productivity of parents, especially working moms, right? So it doesn't mean give me less responsibility, because that's not what we want. It means understand that I'm going to kick ass still, but there's a lot of shit going on. And if I have a moment where I'm like, look way too overwhelmed, it's because I'm digesting what you just said to me as my boss, but also all the stuff that like I'm working on. Like, oh shoot, I have to move that doctor's appointment or whatever. But I don't say it out loud because I don't want you to think that I can't handle it, right? So we're doing a lot of internal things. So awareness, and then I'm going to go out and say this to the brokerage community: improve your maternity leave. It's bad. I was pregnant. I was pregnant at a broker, and I called her. And when I found out what the maternity leave was, I called around to all my friends at brokers, and I was like, "Please tell me this isn't the standard." And they said, "This is the standard." It is.
What's the standard?
3 or 4 weeks paid. That's it.
Oosh. I remember fighting that fight, but on the other side of it, pushing for as long as possible.
Yeah. So,
but that's just, I mean,
I toyed with getting being myself and getting crazy at that employer and really fighting. And I decided it wasn't worth it, which normally I don't do that. But I was like, I'm pregnant. I'm not going to stress myself out even more than what's going on in the world right now because it was, COVID times, etc. But if I could do a call to action, if you brokers really
Advocate. Do it.
all the brokers are like, we love women and we want them to be leaders. You know what? No one is going to stay at your organization during their childbearing age if you give them 3 weeks. They don't have the finances to stay home another 12 weeks or whatever they want, right? To get to 12 or 14. If you really mean it, buck up and give them the maternity leave that they deserve. So thanks for giving me the platform for that one. It's been a long time.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Let it out. I love it.
That's nice.
I mean, you're talking, this was your place to do it. I mean, this is our audience. So I'm hopeful that I hear from some brokers coming out of this episode that they heard you loud and clear and are making the necessary adjustments. All right, we can end on that. That was a powerful way to end the show. So thank you so much for coming on. I fully understand why my father told me that you were one of his favorite customers and people in the industry, because this was, I mean, end to end, you were just incredible. So I really appreciate all the insights from your various roles at really interesting companies and just kind of your aura as a person. So
thank you. This was super fun. I'm so glad you agreed to have me on the show, and I hope it's the beginning of a great friendship for us.
You and me both. All right, friends. That's it for this week. We'll see you next week.